During the opening stages of World War II, the technological might of Nazi Germany was brought to bear against its neighbours in a series of successful invasions known as the Blitzkrieg, the wrath of the German Navy, Army and Air Force, quickly and decisively capturing key strategic locations while raining death, destruction and confusion among enemy forces. Then, on April 9, 1940, one small but important battle proved that the undefeated Nazi war machine wasn't invincible, despite its advanced weaponry, as near-century-old land fortifications manned by undertrained, unprepared conscripts successfully destroyed the German cruiser Blücher, a 6-month-old ship of the line that featured a myriad of modern fighting technology and an experienced crew of men and officers, providing the Norwegian government much-needed time to escape from Germany's advance. The need to invade Denmark and Norway at the start of World War II in September 1939 was considered by both the British and the Germans, as holding bases on the Kattegat Strait between the two nations could easily starve Germany of vital supplies entering the Baltic Sea from the Atlantic, and thus Chief of the German Kriegsmarine, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, outlined to Adolf Hitler both the danger of allowing Norway to ally with Britain, but also the advantages of invading the country themselves, including the potential for establishing U-boat bases. On the other side of the Channel in Britain, Winston Churchill and the War Cabinet proposed Operation Wilfred, whereby the waters off Norway would be mined, and thereby demand a counterattack from the Germans, although disagreements from Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain meant Churchill's scheme was delayed until the beginning of 1940, during which time Norwegian Nazi collaborator Vidkun Quisling met with Hitler to discuss a possible invasion of Scandinavia by Germany, with a preliminary plan named Studi Nord being drafted. The plan, which was expanded into a full-scale surprise attack called Operation Visa-Übung, or Visa Exercise, was to consist of a rapid invasion of Norway through divisions of paratroopers being dropped at major regional centres such as Bergen, Narvik, Tromsø, Trondheim, Kristiansand and Stavanger, while fast warships of the Kriegsmarine would sail up the Oslofjord and seize the capital. The speed of this assault intended to confuse any Norwegian or British resistance, while also not allowing the government time to escape. Spearheading the German naval assault was the Admiral Hipper-class heavy cruiser Blücher, named for Gerhard Liebrecht von Blücher, who fought at the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon, and one of 5 vessels of this class, having been laid down in August 1936 and launched in June 1937 as part of Germany's rapid military expansion in the years prior to the conflict. As with the other members of its class, the Blücher was 665 feet long, 69 feet wide, and displaced 16,170 tons of water, being powered by 3 sets of Blohm & Voss geared steam turbines that drove 3 propellers, and made the vessel capable of attaining a top speed of 37 miles an hour, while her crew complement comprised 42 officers and 1,340 enlisted men, and her weaponry consisted of 8 8-inch SK-L-60 primary guns mounted in 4 twin-gun turrets, 12 4.1-inch L-65 anti-aircraft guns, 12 1.5-inch guns, and 8 0.79-inch guns, as well as 4 triple 21-inch torpedo launchers mounted on the main deck next to the 4 rangefinders for the anti-aircraft guns. For defence, the Blücher's armoured belt was 2.8 to 3.1 inches thick, coupled to a 0.47 to 1.18-inch armoured upper deck, and a main armoured deck of 0.79 to 1.97-inch thickness, while her main battery turrets had 4.1-inch thick armour faces and 2.7-inch thick sides, the ship also being supported by 3 Arado AR-196 spotter seaplanes that could be launched from a single catapult. Formally commissioned on September 20th, 1939, the 7-month-old Blücher led a flotilla comprising the heavy cruiser Lutzow, the light cruiser Emden, and several smaller escorts, while among her complement of crew and officers were also 800 men of the 163rd Wehrmacht Infantry Division, who, upon reaching Oslo, would capture and hold the city. Setting off from Svinemunde on April 8, 1940, the voyage through the Kattegat was not uneventful, with British submarine Triton engaging the flotilla with torpedoes, but ultimately causing no damage, while at around 2300 hours, the Norwegian patrol boat Pol 3 sighted the advancing Germans, which was able to raise the alarm before being set ablaze and captured by German torpedo boat Albatross, followed half an hour later by warning shots being fired at Blücher from the coastal defences at Raoy, but again no damage was caused, and the flotilla slipped out of range. Reaching the mouth of the Oslofjord around midnight, 150 men of the landing force were transferred by our boat to engage Raoy, Bologna, and the naval port and city of Horten, before the flotilla got underway again and proceeded up the Oslofjord at 14 miles an hour, Blücher leading the charge. Following their sighting and subsequent engagement by Norwegian coastal batteries, urgent messages were sent up the Oslofjord as to the German intruders, and so all lighthouses and navigational lights were extinguished, which sunk the channel into total darkness, while at the same time a rapid mobilization was made of what troops could be found in order to defend against the approaching enemies. The Norwegian government, while it had expressed its neutrality, was acutely aware of the strategic importance the nation held in guarding the entrance to the Baltic Sea, and thus it would be essential for either side to capture or ally itself with Norway in order to control these vital waters. Therefore, while the surprise attack of April 8th to April 9th was one the nation was largely unprepared for, with the regional centres quickly falling into the hands of enemy paratroopers, mass conscriptions had been made by the Norwegian armed forces in the weeks preceding the invasion, but most of these troops had little to no experience when it came to fighting. With Oslo now directly threatened by the advancing flotilla, the only obstacle that stood in their way was the Oscarsborg fortress, a coastal battery that had been constructed between 1846 and 1855, approximately 15 miles south of Oslo, sited on an island that sat within the Drøbak Narrows, a natural bottleneck through which the Germans would have to proceed in order to reach the capital. Under the command of 64-year-old Oberst, or Colonel, Birger Eriksen, the forces manning the Oscarsborg fortress comprised a small number of officers and NCOs, while the main bulk of the Norwegian defence was made up of freshly enlisted men, most of whom had been conscripted only 7 days prior, the weapons they had to work with being 3 11-inch guns and an underwater torpedo battery that had been installed between 1874 and 1879. At 04:20, Blücher, despite having lost its element of surprise but determined to maintain its scheduled dawn arrival into Oslo, was sighted by spotlights at the Oscarsborg fortress as it led the attack squadron, and a minute later, the vessel was engaged by the 11-inch guns as it passed close to the fort, the first rounds hitting high above the bridge, the battle station for the commander of the anti-aircraft guns, and knocking out one of the ship's rangefinders, followed by another shell striking near the hangar for the spotter planes, which was being used to store explosives, with a subsequent blaze causing a large explosion that severely damaged the rear quarters of the ship. Continued salvos of the guns against the Blücher destroyed 2 of its 3 spotter planes and punched a hole in the armoured deck over Turbine Room 1, causing both Turbine 1 and Generator Room 3 to stop working due to a lack of steam, thus resulting in only the outboard shafts from Turbine Rooms 2 and 3 being operational, all while the frenzied crew struggled to both contain the blaze and attempt to find the source of the enemy fire, pushing the ship to its full speed in order to slip through the narrow Drøbak channel. Now within only 1,600 feet of the land-based batteries, Blücher was savaged by gunfire from both the Oscarsborg fortress and individual batteries on the mainland, pummeling the heavy cruiser before engaging the following Lutzow, scoring multiple hits before the cruiser was forced to withdraw south back down the Oslofjord, leaving the flagship with no support. Without establishing any targets, Blücher was soon rendered helpless as its steering was disabled, the ship being forced into an uncontrolled port turn that was only righted by way of manipulating the propeller speeds, but this cost the cruiser its forward momentum and left it vulnerable to both the guns and torpedo batteries, which began scoring hits at around 4:34, striking Boiler Room 2 just under the funnel and Turbine Rooms 2 and 3, leaving the ship with only 1 boiler. Regardless, the ship was able to force its way through the barrage of gunfire and slip out of range, but was now severely damaged and in no condition to either fight back or proceed to Oslo, the cruiser mostly ablaze, down on power, and now listing 18 degrees to port. Then, after a few minutes, one of the many blazes aboard the ship reached an ammunition storeroom which sent a violent explosion ripping through the cruiser, igniting the vessel's fuel stores and rupturing several bulkheads, the ship now doomed to sink as water poured through the compromised sections and dragged it onto its side, the order to abandon ship being quickly issued. After an hour, as survivors of the short but vicious battle jumped into the frigid waters of the Oslofjord, Blücher rolled completely over and sank by the head, her upside-down propellers being the final piece of the vessel to slip beneath the waves, coming to rest in 35 fathoms of water, taking with her to the depths a total of 850 men. For the approximately 1,200 survivors, these made their way to the nearby shore and were promptly captured by soldiers from Company No. 4 of the Norwegian Royal Guards, being held at a nearby farm as Norwegian medics tended to the needs of the wounded and dying, all while the damaged Lutzow and remainder of the flotilla retreated south, forcing them to land their troops on the shores of the Oslofjord as they began a lengthy land-based advance, eventually capturing Oscarsborg fortress the next day at 0900, by which time the Norwegians, unable to hold the 1,200 survivors of the Blücher, had abandoned their guard and left the previous night. The destruction of the Blücher was pivotal in allowing the Norwegian government and royal family to make a hasty withdrawal by special train from Oslo, during which time King Haakon VII led a mobile campaign, together with President of the Storting, or Parliament, C.J. Hambro, against the German invaders, later supported by an ultimately unsuccessful British intervention that fought to unseat the Nazis until finally defeated on June 10, 1940, the royal family having been evacuated to Britain, and would subsequently lead a government in exile. Oslo itself was captured on the evening of April 9th by German airborne troops, and Vidkun Quisling was installed as puppet leader of the nation, partaking in the export of Jews to the death camps, but largely having no real autonomy over his Nazi overseers, his reign as Prime Minister of Norway finally ending when he was arrested on May 9, 1945 by Allied troops and executed by the liberated Norwegian government on October 24th at the Akershus fortress in Oslo. The destruction of the Blücher, while not a critical blow against the Germans on the grand scale of World War II, was more a symbolic victory, as it illustrated that the then so far invincible might of the Nazi regime and its military was indeed vulnerable, and proved that, with no loss of life to the Norwegian side, even against overwhelming odds, a highly experienced mechanized force with state-of-the-art weaponry could be outmatched by unproven conscripts with guns and torpedoes that dated back to the Victorian era.